The court has asked me to do a mental retardation evaluation. Now here's a court order. Why don't you take some time and look at that and see if you have any questions about it.
The man in the orange jumpsuit is Daniel Plata. At the time of this evaluation, he was on Texas death row. The man on the left is Dr. George Dankowski, a psychologist hired by Harris County prosecutors to evaluate whether Plata was mentally retarded. If his answer was yes, then Plata would be spared from execution.
I don't understand his word right there.
Evaluate, that's like do testing, like your attorney said. That's another word for testing.
By 2005, Daniel Plata had been on death row for almost a decade. A Mexican immigrant from a rural village in Michoacan, Mexico, his family came to Houston in search of a better life. But in 1996, Plata was sentenced to die for killing a clerk during a convenience store robbery. As the years passed, his mother, Flores Binda, dreaded his execution. She sought help from any lawyer who would listen.
Una vez fui a ver a uno y le dije, me dijo, pues, este es un caso muy difícil, ¿para qué te voy a quitar el dinero? Y entonces solamente hay que esperar. Le dije, ¿esperar a qué? Pues a que lo maten.
Plata's case seemed hopeless until a 2002 Supreme Court decision banned executions of the mentally retarded as cruel and unusual. This prompted Catherine Case, a senior staff attorney with the Texas Defender Service, to file an appeal to commute Plata's death sentence to life. She believed she could prove he was mentally retarded, even though he'd committed capital murder.
As you learn the science, what you find out is people with mental retardation are able to do a lot of things.
To be exempt from execution, a defendant must meet a three-part definition: an IQ of 70 or below, and adaptive behavior deficits and everyday skills used to work and communicate. These symptoms must be present before the age of 18. Case found a note from one of Plata's high school teachers who said his intelligence was extremely low, and she hired a psychologist who tested Plata. He said his IQ was 65, below the cutoff point for mental retardation. But Dankowski, working for the prosecution, had a different opinion. He said Plata scored a 70 on his IQ test. He added that depression and anxiety hurt Plata's performance. So he estimated that Plata's actual IQ score was 77, and he didn't stop estimating there. When Plata scored 61 on his adaptive behavior test, Dankowski adjusted that score upward as well, just as he had done in several other cases.
He consistently has used the same excuses, which is these people don't have retardation. They just grew up in poor households and they didn't have good access to education.
Case thought the federal judge hearing Plata's appeal should refuse to accept Dankowski's estimated scores.
Did the state want to truly know the answer to whether Daniel Plata had mental retardation? Or did it just want some quick and dirty answer that ended in the word no?
A nationally respected psychologist submitted an affidavit in Plata's appeal that disapproved of Dankowski's methodology. And in January 2008, the judge threw out Dankowski's test scores due to fatal errors. He ruled that Plata was mentally retarded, and he commuted his sentence to life. Now, Dankowski's colleagues are speaking out against his methodology.
The scores that Dankowski eventually obtained, in which he used to say, well, this person doesn't fail at the adaptive behavior level, is essentially junk science.
Dr. Jerome Brown is a psychologist with a long history of evaluating defendants in death penalty cases, including several that Dankowski also worked on. After Plata's appeal, he filed a complaint against Dankowski with the State Licensing Board for Psychologists.
If you don't follow the standards and the rules of the psychological testing by which they're constructed, then they have no validity. And Dr. Dankowski certainly should have known that an ethical psychologist does not abuse the psychological testing like that.
Dienkowski will have a chance to respond to his critics in a hearing this February. He could lose his license, and the other Atkins cases he worked on could be re-examined.
How can one court say that this methodology is junk science? And then how can his opinions stand in other cases? I don't understand that. It's not right.
A new opinion in these other cases could mean the difference between life and death for at least a dozen other potentially mentally retarded death row inmates. For the Texas Observer, I'm Renee Feltz.